Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. It's from Steph is So Weird. I'm Steph, and going to be continuing to read The Curse of the Blue Figurine by John Bellairs. We're in the middle of chapter 9 because it was so long. I made sure that I broke it up into 2. So looks like Johnny is going to be seeing a psychiatrist for his behavior, like all tweens should, who are behaving the way he is. All right, and it's later in the evening. I didn't mean to do this so late, but here we go. All right, chapter 9, part 2. Grandma and Grandpa went home and told the professor about their meeting with Dr. Schermerhorn. He listened with great interest and said that, in his opinion, Dr. Melkonian might be able to help. He added that he himself would pay for any fees that Dr. Melkonian charged, and he would also take care of getting Johnny an appointment with the doctor as soon as he could possibly manage it. Johnny stayed home for the day. He did picture puzzles and read and listened to the radio. That evening, he took some pills that Dr. Schermerhorn had given him, and he slept soundly all night. The next morning, he felt much better and was ready to go back to school. But when he got downstairs, he found that he had had another doctor's appointment. That morning, he was going to go down to Cambridge. With the professor. The professor did not tell Johnny that Dr. Melkonian was a psychiatrist. He was afraid that this might scare Johnny off. So he told him that the doctor was a hypnotist. He would help Johnny to relax and sleep soundly at night. Johnny had heard of hypnotists, of course. He had always kind of wanted to be hypnotized, just to see what it was like. So when he got into the car to drive down with the professor, he was a little afraid, but mainly he was eager and curious. In the back of his mind, though, like a dark cloud on the horizon, was the other appointment that he had at midnight on the 17th of May in Dustin Park. It would be scary, he told himself, but it was something he had to do. At least afterward, he would be rid of the ring and the blue figurine. And maybe someday, far in the future, he would sit around and tell his grandchildren about the run-in he had with a real live ghost. Later that morning, Johnny found himself sitting in a rather luxurious waiting room. There was a red oriental rug on the floor, and 2 big couches had puffy, hissy cushions of chocolate-colored leather. Near the door was a bookcase full of books in green and red Morocco leather bindings. The books were about spiritualism and the occult for the most part. While they waited, the professor leafed through the books, and now and then he would say things like, "Rubbish, utter rubbish," or "My God, and people actually believe stuff like this?" Eventually, the door of the inner office opened, and Dr. Melkonian stepped out. He was about as tall as the professor, and he had jet black, greasy hair that ran in ripples across his head. His beard was also black and well-trimmed, and his lips were rosy red. He wore a light gray cutaway and dark gray pinstriped trousers and a double-breasted waistcoat and an ascot with a pearl stick pin. He looked like somebody who was getting ready to go to a wedding. "Ah," he said, nodding politely and smiling. "You're here. Good. Please, come in." The professor and Johnny followed Dr. Melkonian into his book-lined inner office. They sat down in 2 easy chairs, and the doctor sat down behind his desk. "Now then," said the doctor as he picked up his dagger-shaped letter opener and began to play with it, "what seems to be the trouble?" The professor explained. He said that Johnny was very nervous and had had trouble sleeping. Dr. Schermerhorn had examined him and found nothing wrong. Nothing physical, that is. And so they had come here, hoping that Dr. Melkonian would be able to give help of a somewhat different sort. Dr. Melkonian smiled suavely and turned to Johnny. He folded his hands on his desk, sat back, and asked Johnny a couple of questions. Then he took a pair of collapsible pince-nez glasses out of his desk drawer, opened them up, and peered hard at Johnny through them. Then he got up and walked around to the other side of the desk and stood over Johnny, stroking his beard and sizing Johnny up through the glasses, as if he were going to paint his picture. Finally, Dr. Melkonian paced back and forth a bit and then halted abruptly. He picked up the beater of a small bronze gong. Finally, Dr. Melkonian paced back and forth a bit and then halted abruptly. He picked up the beater of a small bronze gong that stood on top of a glazed bookcase. He hit the gong and stood listening as the deep, vibrating tones died away. Then he asked the professor to go out into the waiting room and wait. Time passed. The professor smoked half a pack of Balkan Sobrani cigarettes, and he read quickly through several of the books in the bookcase. Finally, the door of the inner office opened, and Dr. Melkonian appeared. He motioned for the professor to come in. "Please sit down," said the doctor. "Would you care for a cigarette?" He held out a flat gray tin box of Balkan Sobrani cigarettes. The professor grinned, and he took one. "So, you smoke these filthy things too? It's my favorite brand." The doctor seemed pleased. "Ah, you're a man of distinction and culture. Of course I could tell that the moment you walked in. You are a professor, an intellectual. I like intellectuals. By the way, in case you were wondering where young Johnny is, he is asleep on a bed in my examining room. I gave him a dose of sodium pentanethanol to ease him into hypnosis, and he's sleeping off the effects." Dr. Melkonian looked thoughtful and shook his head. My, his case is a strange one. I've never handled one quite like it." He paused and looked hard at the professor. "You're a friend of his, aren't you? I mean, you're his special friend, I gather. Isn't that so?" The professor nodded. "And," the doctor went on, "you know him pretty well, eh?" Again, the professor nodded. "Well then, tell me, does he lie much?" The question was so unexpected that the professor laughed. Then he shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "No, he doesn't lie much. Why do you ask?" "Because his story's a real doozy, that's why." "Actually, I would agree with your impression of him. He seems like a pretty truthful kid, and he seems to really believe what he told me when I put him under hypnosis." Dr. Melkonian puffed at his cigarette. He stared at the green desk blotter and drew circles on it with his finger. Then he looked up suddenly. "He thinks he's met the ghost of a priest who used to live in our city." The professor's mouth dropped open. Then he slapped his forehead with the palm of his hand. "Oh, no! Good gravy! I should have known! This is all my fault! I told him that stupid, idiotic tale about Father Bart, and he believed it!" Ugh. Dr. Melkonian gave the professor an irritated glance. "My dear sir, this is more than believing a story. Johnny has been having delusions, hallucinations. He actually thinks he met with this ghost, and the ghost gave him a magic ring, and there's a blue statue mixed in with the whole mess somehow. What he told me just sort of came tumbling out, and it was all a bit confused. Anyway, he thinks he has to show up in this park next Friday, I think it is. If he doesn't, then bad things will happen to him. The ghost will kill him." The professor looked worried. An odd thought had come to his mind. He examined the burning end of his cigarette and wrinkled up his nose. "You don't think," he said hesitantly, "you don't think there might possibly be a ghost, do you?" Dr. Melkonian looked at the professor incredulously for an instant. Then he burst into loud, uproarious laughter. "Oh, that's a good one," he exclaimed, still laughing. "A ghost? Good night, man. What century are you living in? Ghosts went out when the electric light was invented. Ghosts. My, how do you run on?" Dr. Melkonian went on chortling. Meanwhile, the professor folded his arms across his chest and glowered crabbily. The psychiatrist's laughter died away when he saw that the way the professor was looking at him. He picked up his letter opener and began nervously fiddling with it. It was almost as if he were going to use it to defend himself, in case the professor sprang at him. Now listen, said the professor, still glaring fiercely. I am a cranky old man, and I don't enjoy being made fun of. If you think ghosts are such a big... Excuse me. If you think ghosts are such a great big fat joke, then what are all those ghost books going on in your waiting room, eh? Dr. Melkonian smiled and waved his hand airlessly. Oh, they're there to amuse my patients. If you're a psychiatrist, you get a lot of nuts as patients, and nutty people often believe in ghosts. But you don't seem nutty to me. That's why I was surprised at what you said. I'm not nutty, said the professor through his teeth. I'm as sane as you are, and possibly even saner. All right, you're sane, muttered the doctor irritably. Let's change the subject. I believe you told me over the phone that Johnny lost his mother recently. Is that correct? Yes. And in a way, he also lost his father when he was hauled back into the Air Force to be a jet pilot. And these two things, to my way of thinking, may have... Yes, cut in Dr. Melkonian with an impatient gesture. I was about to say something like that myself. It seems to me likely that Johnny's delusions may be caused by the losses and dislocations that had occurred in his life recently. That was awful. I gotta do that again. It seems to me likely that Johnny's delusions may be caused by the losses and dislocations that have occurred in his life recently. The doctor coughed self-importantly and picked up a pen. He began to doodle on the green blotter. Now, what I would recommend, he went on, is this. First, I think we should explain to him, as best we can, that his mind has been playing tricks on him. Then I think you should go with him to that park. What was its name? Dusty Park? Is that right? Dustin Park, said the professor. It's named for... But never mind. Go on. Yes, Dustin Park. Well, I think you should go there with him. He should keep his appointment with this idiotic, non-existent ghost. Then, when no ghost shows up, and nothing hideous or nasty happens to him, he'll feel better. After that, as soon as school is out, I think he ought to be gotten out of town. Can his grandparents afford to take him on a vacation? The professor frowned and shook his head sadly. No, they're as poor as church mice, poorer even. He stopped because a thought had struck him. He snapped his fingers. My God, he exclaimed. But I could take him on a trip. I'd love to. How about that, eh? Dr. Melkonian grinned and nodded approvingly. I think that would be just peachy dandy. After the experience he's had, or thinks he's had, he needs to get away. Good, excellent. I'm glad you'll be able to take him. Oh, by the way, I have something that belongs to him. A ring. It was on his finger, and he told me, under hypnosis, that the ghost of Father Bart had given him the ring. There's a letter B under the stone, and I suppose you could imagine that stood for Bart? At any rate, according to Johnny, the ghost had told him that he couldn't take the ring off. He would die if he did. Well, I took it off while he was asleep, and needless to say, he didn't die. Dr. Melkonian paused and dug his hand into his coat pocket. He fished out the ring and handed it to the professor. Here. Do you know anything about it? The professor took the ring and turned it back and forth, examining it. The small yellow stones sparkled. The small yellow stones sparkled fitfully in the lamplight. No, he said slowly. No, I don't know a blessed thing about it. I saw it on Johnny's fingers one day, and I asked him where he had gotten it, and he said that his grandfather had given it to him. Then I asked his grandfather about it, and he said that Johnny had told him that I gave it to him. From all of this, I concluded that Johnny had gotten the ring in some weird way and didn't want to tell anyone how. The professor flipped the ring up in the air and caught it. I can't imagine that he stole it. I mean, he's not the thieving kind. And anyway, it doesn't look like it'd be worth stealing. The stone looks like a piece of bottle glass, and the body of the ring seems to have been made out of a rusty... At this point, the door of the examining room opened, and Johnny came stumbling out. His hair was mussed, and his glasses were stuck on crooked, and his eyes were heavy with sleep. "Hi," he said shyly. "Can I come out now?" Dr. Melkonian asked Johnny to sit down in one of the easy chairs, and then he and the professor had a long talk with him. They explained to Johnny that Mr. Beard, otherwise known as Father Bart, was just a figment of his imagination. And when Johnny heard this, he was shocked and bewildered. And then he got angry. "What do you mean I didn't see him?" Johnny burst out. "He was right there in front of me, just like you are." Dr. Melkonian smiled blandly and folded his arms on the desk. "Yes, yes, young man," he said smoothly. "You saw him, all right, only he wasn't there. He existed only in your mind. You've heard of mirages, haven't you? Well, Mr. Beard was like a mirage. You've been through a great deal of sorrow lately, young man, and sorrow can make us do strange things and see strange things. Please try to understand. I'm not saying that you're crazy or that you're lying. I'm merely trying to help you understand what happened to you." Johnny was stunned. He didn't know what to say. But, he stammered, he gave me a ring. Johnny looked down at his left hand. The ring was gone. Immediately he felt panic. What would happen to him now? The professor held up the ring. "Dr. Melkonian took this off of your finger while you were asleep," he said gently. "And don't worry, you're not going to die. There's no ghost and no curse on you or on that stupid blue hunk of crockery. So relax. Everything's going to be all right." Johnny was not so sure about that. Dr. Melkonian and the professor talked very seriously with him for a long time. They argued and wheedled and were terribly logical as they tried to prove to Johnny that the ghost was just imaginary. Johnny resisted. Like most people, he resented it when somebody told him that he was not seeing something that he really thought he had seen. "But what about the ring?" he said insistently. "I mean, I didn't make it up. It's right there on the desk." "I know," said Dr. Melkonian impatiently, "but you may have found the ring somewhere. Maybe you found it in the church that night when you thought you ran into Mr. Beard for the first time. Don't get me wrong. I'm not accusing you of lying. Mr. Beard must have seemed very, very real to you, as real as the professor here, or as me. But hallucinations are that way. You can't tell them from the real thing. You really, truly can't." Johnny was beginning to feel desperate. "But he talked to me. I heard him." Dr. Melkonian was not impressed. "Auditory illusions are common," he said. "Haven't you ever imagined that you heard somebody calling your name? Okay, but what about the time I told you about when the ring flashed and this big wind knocked Eddie Tompkins for a loop? What about that, huh?" "Ringstones flash in the sunlight sometimes," said the doctor smoothly. "And for the sudden wind, well, when you live in New England, you learn to expect things like that. The sea causes violent and unexpected changes in the weather, but Eddie was scared. He really was." Dr. Melkonian smiled faintly. "I'm sure he was. Something startling like that, a wind strong enough to knock you off your pins, well, it would have scared me too. But it's a natural occurrence, not a supernatural one. Can't you see that?" And so it went. After an hour of this sort of thing, Johnny was beginning to have doubts about what he had seen and heard. He was still not entirely convinced, but he did have doubts. To tell the truth, he wanted to have doubts. If Father Bart was imaginary, that meant that he was not threatened with death and destruction. On the other hand, the whole experience had been so real, so very real. Johnny's mind began to whirl. Nothing made sense anymore. Was Dr. Melkonian real? Was the doctor real? Was anything real? After the session in Dr. Melkonian's office, Johnny rode home to Dustin Heights in the professor's car. On the way, the professor asked Johnny if he would like to go on a little trip with him after school was over. He explained that they would be going up into the White Mountains to sightsee and hike around, maybe even do a little mountain climbing. Johnny was delighted by this idea. He had seen pictures of the White Mountains of New Hampshire, but he had never actually been up there on a visit. The trip sounded great, but now his mind shifted to the totally different subject. What was he going to do about the meeting that he was supposed to have, or wasn't supposed to have, with Mr. Beard in Dustin Park next Friday night. The professor glanced sideways, saw the look on Johnny's face, and he read his thoughts. Are you worried about your midnight rendezvous? He asked with a slight smile. Johnny nodded grumly. Yeah, what do you think I ought to do? The professor's smile got broader and more confident. Dr. Melkonian and I discussed this, he said briskly, and we think that you should keep this so-called appointment. I'll go with you, and if a ghost shows up, well, I've always kind of had a hankering to see one. Are you game? Are you still willing to go? Johnny nodded, and so that was settled. When they got back to Fillmore Street, the professor had a little talk with the Dixons. He explained to them as well as he could that Dr. Melkonian had said. He explained to them as well as he could what Dr. Melkonian had said about Johnny and his problems. They were suspicious because they didn't like psychiatrists. They thought psychiatrists were like witch doctors. They also thought that only crazy people believed in the things that psychiatrists said. But they were glad to hear that Johnny was not seriously ill or ready for the insane asylum. And they thought that the trip to the White Mountains was a really wonderful idea. Several days passed. One afternoon, when the Dixons were out shopping, the professor sneaked over and took away the blue figurine and the hollow book that held it. He had told Johnny that he was going to do this, and Johnny agreed that it was probably a good idea. Meanwhile, Johnny went about his usual routine. He felt much, much better than he had felt in a long time. He slept soundly that night, and he did not hear any strange noises. He felt as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Naturally, he was still a bit worried about Friday night. He did not know what was going to happen. Not really. But he reminded himself the ring was gone from his finger, and he was still among the living. That was an encouraging thought, to say the least. Friday night came, and it was pouring rain outside. The professor, umbrella in hand, met Johnny at the front door of his house at 11:45. Off they went, through the wind and wet, and finally they arrived in Dustin Park. They stood around by Hannah Dustin's statue and waited. The streetlight burned placidly. Yeah, I've never read that word before. The streetlight burned placidly, and the bronze Hannah hovered as menacingly as ever. The rain pelted down and made a racket on the stiff cloth of the professor's umbrella. Across the street, the columned church loomed ghostly and white, thrusting its tall spire up into the night sky. Time passed. 15 minutes, half an hour, nobody came. The professor unbuttoned his raincoat, reached into his jacket pocket, and pulled out his watch. He glanced at it, sniffed, and looked around. Well, he said dryly, Shakespeare would say that this was a night when the sheeted dead might squeak and gibber in the streets. But they ain't out, and on a night like this, I don't blame them. No, sir, I don't blame them at all. He put his watch back in his pocket and peered owlishly around. Then he folded his arms, leered jauntily, and began to whistle tune, The Ghost of John. After he had whistled it through once, he sang softly, Have you seen the ghost of John? Long white bones and the flesh all gone. Oh, oh, wouldn't it be chilly with no skin on? Yeah. Johnny was not in such a jolly mood. He would have liked to be, but he couldn't manage it. He was staring intently at the great mass of shadow on the right side of the Unitarian Church. Mr. Beard had walked out that darkness last Saturday night. Try as he might, Johnny just couldn't persuade himself that Mr. Beard was imaginary. Yet the professor had told him that Mr. Beard didn't exist. Dr. Melkonian had told him this too. And now, here in the park, the professor was singing silly songs and making fun of ghostly fears. Johnny asked himself why he couldn't let go of his lingering fear and be cheerful too. The rain kept pouring down. Now the wind began to blow, and Johnny felt rain slashing across his legs. A hard gust hit him, and the professor staggered sideways. Drat! growled the professor as he pulled the umbrella back over their heads. He turned and looked at Johnny, who was still peering anxiously this way and that. Look, John, he said in a more gentle tone, we ought to be getting on home. Nothing is going to happen here. Believe me, nothing except that we might go to sleep on our feet. I'm an old geezer, and these late hours are not for the likes of me. He yawned hugely and flapped his hand against his mouth. Let's head for home. How about it, eh? Are you with me? Johnny nodded. They trotted off down the long sidewalk that ran diagonally across the little park. They paused at the curb, and a car whooshed past, its taillights staining the pavement red. As they started across the street, Johnny glanced back, one more time, over his shoulder. Nobody there. Why couldn't he be calm? Why couldn't he heave a deep sigh of relief? Well, he couldn't. Johnny felt nothing but foreboding, the fear of someone who was waiting for something to happen. Oof, that was it. So he had a long argument with a psychiatrist that did turn out to be a hypnotist. Go figure. I should know. I'm a hypnotist. So that's fun. Yeah, that's cool. That's great. So glad that worked out, and the ghost didn't show up. So we'll see what happens. There's still chapter 10, chapter 11, and chapter 12. I just said chapter. Whatever. 10, 11, and 12. So only got 3 chapters left. We'll see what happens. All right, gonna end it here until the next time. Thank you. If you enjoyed this, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Awesome. Good day.